Jessica had been staring at her phone for the past 10 minutes, reading and rereading the same text message from her best friend. "Trust me on this one. Just one date. He's different, I promise." She sighed and tossed the phone onto her couch. Different. That's what everyone always said. Her last 3 relationships had all started with someone telling her the guy was different, and they were all the same in the end. Obsessed with showing off their cars, their watches, their expensive dinner reservations at places where you needed to whisper, because apparently that made the food taste better. Jessica was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that settled into your bones after years of disappointing first dates and relationships that looked perfect on the surface, but felt empty underneath. She was 29, successful in her marketing career and completely exhausted by the dating scene. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Saturday, 3 p.m., the Corner Cafe on Maple Street. "His name is David, please, Jess, for me?" The Corner Cafe. At least it wasn't some pretentious restaurant where a salad cost $40. Jessica typed back quickly before she could change her mind. "Fine, but you owe me." Saturday arrived faster than she wanted it to. Jessica stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what to wear to meet a man she knew absolutely nothing about. Her friend had been weirdly secretive about David's background. All she would say was that he was genuine and kind and exactly what you need right now. She finally settled on a simple navy dress and her favorite leather jacket. Professional but not trying too hard. She checked her reflection one more time, grabbed her purse, and headed out the door. The cafe was only 15 minutes away, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop in the older part of town. When she walked in, the smell of fresh coffee and vanilla filled the air. It was cozy with mismatched wooden chairs and local artwork on the walls. Nothing fancy, nothing Instagram perfect, just real. She scanned the room looking for someone who might be waiting for a blind date. That's when she saw him, sitting at a corner table near the window. He was looking down at his phone, and when he glanced up and their eyes met, he smiled and raised his hand slightly in an awkward wave. Jessica walked over, taking him in as she approached. He stood up when she reached the table, and that's when she noticed his clothes. A faded green jacket that had definitely seen better days, jeans that were worn at the knees, sneakers that were clean but clearly old with the white rubber turning slightly yellow around the edges. "Jessica?" he asked, and his voice was warm, friendly. "That's me. You must be David." Guilty as charged, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit. I hope you didn't have trouble finding the place." "No, it was easy." She sat down, setting her purse on the empty chair beside her. "I've actually passed by here 100 times but never came in." "Really? This is one of my favorite spots." He settled back into his chair, seeming genuinely relaxed. "The coffee's nothing special, but the people who run it are good folks. Family-owned for 30 years. A waitress came by and David ordered a regular black coffee and a blueberry muffin. When Jessica ordered a cappuccino, he didn't even blink. When the waitress walked away, he pulled out his wallet and counted some bills, setting them on the table. "So," Jessica started, trying to read the situation. "My friend tells me you're a good guy." But she was pretty mysterious about everything else. David laughed, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Yeah, she tends to do that. I think she was worried you'd say no if you knew too much up front." "And what would have made me say no?" He shrugged. "Probably the fact that I'm not exactly what most people picture when they think about dating material. I work in building maintenance. I supervise repairs and upkeep for an apartment complex downtown. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work." Jessica felt something shift inside her chest. Here was a man who led with his job title as if it was something he needed to apologize for. No bragging. No trying to make it sound more impressive than it was. Just honesty. "That sounds like important work," she said, and she meant it. "I can't even fix a leaky faucet." "Most people can't," David replied. "That's why I have job security." He smiled again, and Jessica found herself smiling back. Their drinks arrived, and the conversation began to flow naturally. They talked about everything and nothing. David asked about her work in marketing and actually listened to her answers. He asked follow-up questions that showed he was paying attention. When she mentioned a difficult campaign she'd worked on, he didn't try to one-up her with his own story. He just listened. "You know what the best part of my job is?" David said, stirring his coffee. It's when I fix something for someone and I can see the relief on their face. Like last week, there was this elderly woman on the 4th floor. Her heating broke in the middle of the night and it was freezing. I got the call at 2 in the morning, and when I showed up, she was sitting there in 3 sweaters and a blanket, trying not to complain. "That's awful," Jessica said. It was, but I got it fixed within an hour. And when the heat started flowing again, she actually cried a little. She tried to give me $20 as a tip, but I wouldn't take it. She's on a fixed income. That $20 meant a lot more to her than it would to me. He paused, looking out the window. Those moments remind me why I do what I do. Jessica studied him as he spoke. There was something about the way he told the story, the way his whole face became animated when he talked about helping someone. This wasn't a rehearsed speech designed to make him look good. This was just him, sharing something that mattered. "That's really kind," she said softly. "It's just being human," David replied. "We all need help sometimes." They talked for another hour, and Jessica realized she'd completely lost track of time. David shared stories about the interesting characters in his building, about the challenges of keeping old systems running, about his philosophy that everything worth doing was worth doing right. He talked about his childhood, about growing up without much money but with parents who taught him the value of hard work and integrity. Jessica found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She told him about the pressure she felt to constantly prove herself at work, about how exhausting it was to be surrounded by people who measured success by the size of their houses and the brands on their clothes, about how she sometimes felt like she was losing sight of what actually mattered. "I get that," David said, his eyes serious now. "It's easy to get caught up in what society says you should want. But at the end of the day, none of that stuff makes you happy. Not really. The things that matter are simple. Good conversation, genuine connection, knowing you made someone's day a little better." As he spoke, Jessica noticed something. When David had reached for his coffee cup, his sleeve had ridden up slightly and she'd caught a glimpse of his watch. It looked expensive, really expensive. The kind of thing that seemed completely out of place with his worn jacket and old sneakers. But before she could think about it too much, he'd pulled his sleeve down, almost self-consciously, and the moment passed. "I hate to break this up," David said, checking the timer, "but I should probably get going. I've got an early start tomorrow." "Of course," Jessica said, though she found herself disappointed. She'd been enjoying this, actually enjoying it without the usual first date anxiety or the feeling that she needed to perform. David insisted on paying the full bill, despite Jessica's protests. "It's not about the money," he said. "It's about wanting to do something nice for someone I've enjoyed spending time with." They walked out together into the cool afternoon air. David turned to her with a slightly uncertain expression. "I take the bus," he said, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone. "I know that probably sounds weird, but I find it's more practical than keeping a car in the city. Parking's a nightmare, and honestly, the environment could use all the help it can get." "I think that's actually really smart," Jessica said, and she meant it. "Can I walk you somewhere? Your car?" "I'm just 2 blocks that way," she pointed. "I'm fine." They stood there for a moment, an awkward pause that somehow wasn't uncomfortable. "I'd really like to see you again," David said. "If you're interested." Jessica surprised herself by answering immediately. "I'd like that too." His face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "Great, can I text you? Maybe we could do something next weekend." "Sounds perfect." They exchanged numbers, and David waited until she'd started walking before heading toward the bus stop. Jessica glanced back once and saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, looking oddly content. As she walked to her car, Jessica felt something she hadn't felt after a first date in years. Hope. Not the desperate kind that came from wanting someone to be right for you, but the quiet kind that came from genuinely enjoying someone's company. She texted her friend as soon as she got in her car. "Okay, you were right. He is different." The response came back immediately. "Told you." "Dinner next week?" "I want details." Jessica smiled and started her car. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't analyzing every word of the conversation or looking for red flags. She was just thinking about how nice it had been to sit across from someone who seemed to actually see her, not just what she could offer or how she looked on his arm. She didn't notice the contradictions yet. Didn't think too hard about the expensive watch or the way David spoke about art and literature, with a kind of familiarity that usually came from education, not from fixing boilers and unclogging drains. She didn't question why someone who took the bus seemed so comfortable in his own skin, or why his worn clothes were actually high-quality pieces that had just been, well, worn. All she knew was that something about David felt right, and after years of things feeling wrong, that was enough. 3 weeks had passed since that first date at the corner cafe, and Jessica found herself thinking about David more than she wanted to admit. They'd seen each other 5 times now, and each date had been simple, easy, and somehow more meaningful than any expensive dinner she'd ever had. Their second date had been a walk through the botanical gardens on a free admission day. David had shown up in the same worn jacket, carrying 2 paper bags with sandwiches he'd made himself. They'd sat by the pond, feeding the ducks bits of bread and talking about everything from childhood memories to their biggest fears. When it started to rain, they'd run laughing to the nearest shelter, and David had given her his jacket without hesitation, even though it left him shivering in just a thin shirt. The third date was at a small Italian restaurant where the pasta was incredible and the prices were reasonable. David had insisted on paying again, though Jessica noticed him carefully checking the total before pulling out cash. She'd offered to split it, but he'd shaken his head with that gentle smile of his. "Let me do this," he'd said. "I budget for these things. It makes me happy to treat you." By their 5th date, Jessica's feelings had shifted from curiosity to something deeper, something that made her stomach flip when her phone buzzed with his name, something that made her friends notice the change in her mood. "You're glowing," her friend Rachel said over lunch one Tuesday. They were at their usual spot near the office, a busy sandwich place where they could barely hear each other over the crowd. "This David guy must be something special." "He is," Jessica admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. "He's just different from anyone I've dated before." "Different how?" Rachel leaned forward, genuinely interested. "He's real, like completely genuine. There's no game playing, no trying to impress me with expensive stuff. He just shows up as himself and makes me feel like I can do the same." Rachel smiled, but there was something uncertain in her expression. "That's great, Jess, really, but what does he do again? Building maintenance?" "He's a maintenance supervisor. He manages repairs for an apartment complex." "Right." Rachel picked at her salad, not meeting Jessica's eyes. "And that doesn't bother you?" "I mean, long-term?" Jessica felt a flicker of irritation. "Why would it bother me?" "I'm not being judgmental," Rachel said quickly. "I'm just thinking practically. You make good money. You're climbing the ladder at work. What happens when you want to buy a house or take a nice vacation? Is he going to be able to contribute equally?" "I don't know," Jessica said honestly. "We haven't talked about that stuff yet. We're just dating." I know. I'm probably overthinking it." Rachel reached across the table and squeezed Jessica's hand. "I'm happy you're happy. That's what matters." But the conversation stuck with Jessica for the rest of the day. She'd never really thought about the practical side of things. She just enjoyed being with David. But Rachel had a point, didn't she? What about the future? That evening, David texted her. "Free tomorrow night. Want to show you something?" She replied immediately. "Always free for you." "What's the plan?" "It's a surprise. Dress comfortable. I'll pick you up at 7. Pick her up." David always met her places or they took the bus together. This was new. The next evening, Jessica waited outside her apartment building at 7 sharp. She'd chosen jeans and a comfortable sweater, not sure what to expect. When she saw David walking up the street, she smiled and waved. He wasn't alone. He was pushing a bicycle with a small attached cart. "Please tell me we're not biking somewhere," Jessica laughed. "We are," David grinned. "But don't worry. You get the luxury seat." He gestured to the cart, which he'd filled with cushions. "I've been borrowing this from a friend who uses it for his kids. Figured it would be a fun way to get around tonight." Jessica couldn't help but laugh. It was ridiculous and charming, and so completely David. She climbed into the cart, feeling like a kid, and they set off through the streets as the sun began to set. David pedaled them through the city, taking side streets she'd never noticed before. He pointed out interesting buildings, told her stories about the neighborhoods they passed through. When they reached the waterfront, he parked the bike and helped her out of the cart. "Come on," he said, taking her hand naturally, like it was the most normal thing in the world. He led her to a small pier where a few people were scattered, sitting on benches or standing by the railing. The view was beautiful, the water reflecting the orange and pink of the sunset. "I come here sometimes," David said softly, "when I need to think or just clear my head. It's peaceful." They sat on an empty bench, and for a while they just watched the water in comfortable silence. Jessica realized this was something she'd never experienced with anyone else. The ability to just be quiet together without it feeling awkward or forced. "Can I tell you something?" David said finally. "Of course, and I really like you, Jessica. More than I expected to when we first met." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I know I'm not the typical guy you probably imagined yourself with. I don't have a fancy job or a nice car. I can't take you to expensive restaurants every weekend. But I can promise you that when I'm with you, you have my full attention, you have my honesty, and you have someone who genuinely cares about making you happy." Jessica felt her throat tighten with emotion. "David, you make me happier than anyone with a fancy job and a nice car ever has. You see me. You listen when I talk. You remember little things I mention in passing. That's worth more than any expensive dinner." He smiled, relieved. "Good. Because I was worried maybe you'd start to wonder why you're dating a guy who takes you on bike rides instead of in a luxury car." "I prefer the bike," she said, and meant it. They stayed until the stars started to appear. Then David biked them back to her apartment. When they said goodbye, he kissed her for the first time, gentle and sweet, and Jessica felt like her heart might burst. Over the next 2 weeks, their relationship deepened. They fell into an easy rhythm, seeing each other several times a week. David would finish his maintenance work and meet her after her office hours. Sometimes they'd grab cheap takeout and eat it in the park. Other times they'd go to free concerts or art gallery openings. It was at one of these gallery openings that Jessica noticed something odd. They were looking at a series of paintings, abstract pieces that Jessica didn't particularly understand. She'd made a comment about not really getting modern art, and David had smiled. "The thing about abstract expressionism," he'd said, gesturing to the painting, "is that it's not really about getting it intellectually. Look at how the artist uses color here. The way the red bleeds into the blue. It creates this sense of tension, of conflict. And then this yellow stroke here, it's like a moment of hope breaking through." Jessica had stared at him. "How do you know so much about art?" David had looked almost embarrassed. "Oh, I read a lot, and I come to these things whenever I can. Free education, right?" It made sense, but something about it felt off. The way he'd spoken, with such confidence and knowledge, it seemed like more than just casual reading. But Jessica had pushed the thought aside. Another time, her laptop had crashed right before a big presentation. She'd been panicking, near tears, when David had calmly taken the computer and started working on it. His fingers had moved across the keyboard with the speed and certainty of someone who did this professionally. "How do you know how to do this?" she'd asked, watching him navigate through system files and recovery options she didn't even know existed. "You pick things up when you work in building maintenance," he'd said, not looking up from the screen. "I'm constantly fixing stuff. Computers, heating systems, electrical problems. It's all just problem solving." He'd recovered her presentation within 20 minutes. And Jessica had been so grateful and relieved that she hadn't questioned it further. But the little inconsistencies were starting to add up. The expensive watch he wore sometimes, the way he knew about wine when they'd been at a restaurant, the time she'd mentioned a book and he'd not only read it but could discuss the author's other works and their place in contemporary literature. One Saturday, Jessica invited David to meet some of her friends. They met at a casual bar, nothing fancy, just drinks and appetizers. Her friend Rachel was there, along with 2 colleagues from work, Kevin and Linda. The evening started well enough. David was his usual charming self, asking questions, listening attentively, making everyone laugh with his stories about mishaps in his building. But Jessica could feel the judgment in the air, especially from Linda. "So, David," Linda said, swirling her wine, "what are your long-term career goals? Do you want to eventually manage multiple buildings or maybe start your own maintenance company?" David had smiled pleasantly. "I'm actually pretty happy where I am. The work is meaningful and I get to help people every day. That's enough for me." "That's nice," Linda had said, in a tone that clearly meant she thought it wasn't nice at all. "But don't you want more? More money, more prestige?" "I want to be happy," David had replied simply. "Money and prestige don't guarantee that." Later, when David had excused himself to use the restroom, Linda had leaned toward Jessica. "He seems nice, but are you sure about this? I mean, he's not exactly ambitious, is he?" "He's ambitious about being a good person," Jessica had said more sharply than she intended. "Not everyone measures success by their salary." "I'm just saying," Linda continued, "you're going places in your career. You need someone who can keep up with you, not hold you back." Rachel had jumped in then, trying to smooth things over, but the damage was done. When David came back, Jessica had been quiet, lost in her own thoughts. On the walk home, David had finally asked, "Did I do something wrong tonight?" "No," Jessica said quickly. "No, you were perfect. My friends, they can be judgmental sometimes." "They're worried about you," David said. "That's what good friends do. They want to make sure you're with someone who can give you the life you deserve." "And what life do I deserve?" David stopped walking and turned to face her. "One where you're valued, where you're respected, where someone makes you laugh and supports your dreams and shows up when you need them. Whether that someone has money or not shouldn't matter. But I understand if it does matter to you. I wouldn't blame you." Jessica felt tears prick her eyes. "It doesn't matter to me. I wish you could see what I see when I look at you. I see someone who's kind and thoughtful and genuine. Someone who makes me want to be a better person. That's worth everything." David had pulled her into a hug, then holding her tight. "You make me want to be better, too," he'd whispered. But as Jessica lay in bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about everything. The questions her friends had raised. The little things about David that didn't quite add up. The way he seemed to have knowledge and skills that went beyond what she'd expect from a maintenance supervisor. Who exactly was David? And why did she have this nagging feeling that there was more to his story than he was telling her? She picked up her phone and almost typed his name into a search engine. Her finger hovered over the search button, but then she stopped. Did she really want to go digging into his life? Wasn't part of what made their relationship special the fact that they were getting to know each other naturally, without the internet telling her who he was supposed to be? She put the phone down and closed her eyes. Whatever David's story was, she'd rather hear it from him, when he was ready to tell her, if he ever was. What Jessica didn't know was that 3 blocks away, David was lying awake too, staring at his ceiling in the modest apartment he kept in the building he supposedly just maintained. An apartment that was actually the penthouse of a building he owned, one of 47 buildings across the city that belonged to him. He thought about Jessica's face when her friend had questioned his ambitions. The way she'd defended him, the way she saw him as just David, not as the CEO of Park Industries, not as the millionaire who'd been on the cover of business magazines, not as the eligible bachelor that socialites threw themselves at during charity galas. He'd started this as a test, a way to find someone who could love him for who he was, not what he had. But it had become so much more than that. He was falling for Jessica, really falling. And every day that passed made it harder to imagine telling her the truth. Because what would happen when she found out? Would she understand why he'd hidden his identity? Or would she feel betrayed, lied to, manipulated? David rolled over and looked at the clock. 2 a.m. He had a board meeting in 6 hours, where he'd have to be David Park, the decisive CEO. But right now, he was just David, a guy who'd fallen for a woman while pretending to be someone he wasn't, and he had no idea how to fix the mess he'd created. Jessica was having the best Monday morning she'd had in months. She'd just gotten the email she'd been waiting for, the one that could change the trajectory of her entire career. Her hands were shaking slightly as she read it for the 3rd time. "Congratulations. Your team has been selected to lead the marketing campaign for Park Industries' new sustainable housing initiative. This is a high-profile project with significant visibility. The client presentation is scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. at Park Industries headquarters." Park Industries. Even Jessica, who didn't follow business news religiously, knew that name. They were one of the biggest real estate and technology companies in the city. Their CEO was notoriously private, rarely appearing in public, but the company itself was everywhere. Those sleek glass buildings downtown, the new apartment complexes that were transforming old neighborhoods, the tech innovations and smart home systems. All Park Industries. She immediately called her boss, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice and failing completely. I know, her boss laughed. "I recommended your team specifically. This is your chance to shine, Jessica. Park Industries doesn't work with just anyone. If you nail this, you're looking at a serious promotion." The rest of the day was a blur of planning meetings and research. Jessica and her team of 4 pulled together everything they could find about Park Industries. They studied the company's values, their previous projects, their target demographics. They worked late into the evening, ordering pizza and running on caffeine and adrenaline. Around 8 p.m., Jessica's phone buzzed. David. Hey, you. Haven't heard from you all day. Everything okay? She smiled and stepped out of the conference room to call him back. Everything's amazing, she said, unable to contain her excitement. I got assigned to this huge project. It's the biggest thing I've ever worked on. That's incredible. Tell me about it. It's for Park Industries. You know, the big real estate company? We're creating the entire marketing campaign for their new sustainable housing project. The presentation is Friday and I'm so nervous I could throw up, but also so excited I can barely think straight. There was a pause on the other end. Just a beat too long. David? You there? Yeah, sorry. That's really great, Jess. You're going to do amazing. The only scary part is we have to present to the CEO. Apparently he never attends these things, but for this project, he's making an exception. Nobody on my team has ever even seen him. He's like some kind of ghost who runs this massive empire from behind closed doors. Another pause. I'm sure he's just a regular person. A regular person who's probably worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Jessica laughed. But yeah, you're right. I just need to focus on doing good work. That's all I can control. They talked for a few more minutes before Jessica had to get back to her team. She didn't notice how quiet David had become, or how quickly he ended the call. The next 4 days were the most intense work week of Jessica's life. She barely slept, running on coffee and determination. Her team created mock-ups, designed presentation boards, crafted the perfect pitch. They practiced their presentation over and over until everyone could recite it in their sleep. David texted her every day with encouragement, but she was too busy to see him. She promised they'd celebrate after the presentation on Friday, once everything was over. He sent back a simple good luck. You've got this. Friday morning arrived. Jessica put on her best suit, the navy one she saved for important occasions. She checked her reflection 5 times, making sure everything was perfect. Her team met in the lobby of Park Industries headquarters at 9:30, giving them time to get through security and set up. The building was impressive. All glass and steel, soaring 30 floors into the sky. The lobby had marble floors and abstract art on the walls. Everything about it screamed money and power. Jessica felt both intimidated and excited. This was the big leagues. They were escorted to the 28th floor by a polished assistant who smiled but didn't make small talk. The conference room they were led to was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. A massive wooden table dominated the center, surrounded by expensive leather chairs. Mr. Park will be here shortly, the assistant said. Please make yourselves comfortable. Can I get anyone water, coffee? Jessica's team set up their presentation materials, everyone moving with nervous energy. Her colleague Kevin kept adjusting his tie. Linda was reviewing note cards for the 100th time. Jessica herself couldn't stop tapping her pen against her palm. At exactly 10 a.m. the door opened. The world seemed to move in slow motion. Jessica looked up from her presentation notes, a polite smile ready on her face for this mysterious CEO everyone talked about, but no one seemed to really know. The smile froze. Standing in the doorway, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, with his hair styled differently but unmistakably him. Good morning, he said, his voice professional but with that same gentle tone she'd come to know. I'm David Park, thank you for coming in today. The room started to spin. Jessica gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. David, her David who rode bikes and took the bus and counted out bills at coffee shops, was David Park. The David Park, CEO of a multi-million-dollar empire. Everything from the past 2 months flashed through her mind in an instant. Every date, every conversation, every time he'd pretended to be struggling financially, every moment she'd defended him to her friends, said money didn't matter, believed she was dating someone humble and simple. It had all been a lie. Ms. Chen, she heard her boss's voice, distant and concerned. Are you all right? You look pale. Jessica realized everyone was staring at her. Her team, her boss, the other executives in the room.
and David, whose expression was breaking her heart even as rage built in her chest. "I'm fine," she managed to say.
Just need some water. One of the assistants rushed to pour her a glass. Jessica drank it, buying herself time to think, to process, to figure out how to survive the next hour without screaming or crying or both. "Should we begin?" David asked, and there was a question in his eyes when he looked at her. A plea, maybe, but Jessica couldn't read him anymore. She didn't know who he was. Had she ever? Her boss, oblivious to the tension, launched into the opening remarks. Then Kevin took over with the market analysis. Jessica stood there, her part of the presentation coming up next, wondering how she was going to speak when her throat felt like it was closing up. But she was a professional. She'd worked too hard to let this derail everything, so when Kevin finished and looked at her expectantly, she stepped forward. Her voice came out steady, strong even. She talked about brand positioning, about reaching younger demographics interested in sustainability, about social media strategies and influencer partnerships. She showed the mock-ups her team had created, explained the timeline, discussed budget allocations, and through it all, she avoided looking directly at David, but she could feel his eyes on her. Could sense him leaning forward slightly when she spoke, as if he was hungry for every word. Once, when she made a particularly good point about community engagement, she heard him murmur "excellent" under his breath. The presentation lasted 45 minutes. When it was over, there was a moment of silence before the room erupted in approving nods and murmured compliments. "This is impressive work," one of the executives said. "Really top-notch." "I agree," David said, and his voice carried weight that made everyone else quiet. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Ms. Chen, your analysis of our target market was particularly insightful." Jessica forced herself to meet his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Park." The formality of it seemed to hurt him. She was glad. "I'd like to move forward with this proposal," David continued, addressing the room now. "Let's have contracts drawn up by early next week." He turned to Jessica's boss. "Your team has done exceptional work." There were handshakes all around. Jessica's boss was beaming. Her teammates were barely containing their excitement. They'd done it. They'd landed the biggest client of their careers, but Jessica felt numb. As everyone started gathering their things, David caught her eye and gave the slightest nod toward the door. She understood. He wanted to talk to her privately. Part of her wanted to walk right past him and never look back. But another part, the part that had spent 2 months falling for who she thought he was, needed answers. "I'm going to use the restroom," she told her team. "I'll meet you downstairs." She waited until everyone had filed out, chattering excitedly about the successful presentation. Then it was just her and David in that massive conference room, the city sprawling below them through the windows. "Jessica," he started, taking a step toward her. She held up her hand. Don't. I need to explain." "Explain what?" "How you lied to me for 2 months. How you pretended to be someone you're not. How you let me talk about money not mattering and defending you to my friends, while you sat there knowing you're worth more money than I'll see in my entire lifetime." "It wasn't like that," David said, and she could hear the desperation in his voice. "Please, just let me explain." "Fine." Jessica crossed her arms. "Explain. I'd love to hear how this makes sense." David ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. It was such a familiar gesture that it made Jessica's chest ache. "2 years ago, my father died and left me this company," he began. "I'd been working here for years, worked my way up, but suddenly I was the CEO of everything. And with that came attention I never wanted. People who wanted to be with me for what I had, not who I was. So you decided to pretend to be poor. I decided to see if anyone could care about me as just me. Not as David Park, the CEO. Just as David, a guy who likes long walks and bad coffee and helping people. By lying to them? Yes." He didn't try to defend it. "By lying. And at first it was just supposed to be one date. I was going to tell you the truth after that. But then I met you and you were so real, so genuine. You didn't care that I took the bus or wore old clothes or couldn't take you to fancy restaurants. You liked me for me, but that wasn't you." Jessica's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "That was a character you created. I don't even know who you really are." "Yes, you do." David took another step closer. "Everything I told you was real. My values, my beliefs, the things I care about. The only thing I lied about was my job and my money. Everything else was true. The only thing?" Jessica laughed bitterly. David, that's not a small thing. That's fundamental. You watched me struggle with what my friend said about your lack of ambition. You let me feel guilty for caring about you despite thinking you didn't have much money. You made me question my own values, I know. His voice cracked. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Jessica. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. She felt tears building but refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. You made me fall for someone who doesn't exist. He does exist. I'm right here. No. Jessica shook her head. The man I fell for was honest. He valued authenticity above everything else. He told me that genuine connection was all that mattered. But you can't have genuine connection built on lies, can you? David looked like she'd physically struck him. What are we going to do? We? Jessica picked up her bag. There is no we. There's you. A billionaire CEO who apparently likes playing dress-up and slumming it with regular people. And there's me, someone who was stupid enough to believe in something real. It was real, David insisted. My feelings for you are real. I don't believe you. Jessica walked toward the door, then stopped. And even if they are real, it doesn't matter. Because I can't trust you. I can't trust anything you say. Every conversation we had, I'm going to wonder what else you were lying about. Jessica, please. She turned back to look at him one more time. He looked devastated, standing there in his expensive suit in his expensive office, with everything money could buy except the one thing he apparently wanted. Her. Congratulations on your successful presentation, he said quietly. You really were exceptional. Thank you, Mr. Park, she emphasized the formal name. I hope you enjoy your sustainable housing project. I'm sure it'll make you even richer. She walked out before he could respond, heading for the elevators on shaking legs. She made it all the way down to the lobby, out through the glass doors around the corner to a small park a block away. And then she finally let herself cry. Jessica didn't go back to the office that day. She texted her boss that she wasn't feeling well, which wasn't technically a lie. She felt like someone had reached into her chest and twisted everything around until nothing sat right anymore. She went home, changed out of her suit, and spent the rest of Friday curled up on her couch trying to make sense of what had happened. Her phone kept buzzing. Messages from her team celebrating their success, calls from her boss, and 17 missed calls from David. She didn't answer any of them. By Saturday morning, she'd cried herself out. Now she just felt hollow, empty, like someone had scooped out all the feelings she'd been carrying around for the past 2 months and left. Nothing but a void. Her best friend showed up at her door around noon with ice cream and wine, even though it was barely lunchtime. I'm coming in whether you want me to or not, Rachel announced, pushing past Jessica into the apartment. You've been ghosting everyone since yesterday, and I'm worried about you. Jessica closed the door and followed Rachel to the living room. How did you know something was wrong? Because you landed the biggest client of your career and instead of celebrating, you disappeared. Rachel set the ice cream and wine on the coffee table and sat down, patting the spot next to her. What happened? And then it all came pouring out. Everything. The presentation. The moment David walked into that conference room. The realization that the man she'd been dating was actually a millionaire CEO who'd been pretending to be someone else. The confrontation afterward. The lies. The betrayal. Rachel listened without interrupting, her eyes getting wider with each revelation. Wait, she said when Jessica finally finished. David, your David is David Park? The David Park? Apparently. I don't think he was laughing, Rachel said gently. From what you've told me, he sounds like he actually cares about you. He lied to me for 2 months. I know, and that's not okay. But maybe his reasons weren't completely terrible? Jessica pulled her hand away. Whose side are you on? Yours, always yours. Rachel's voice was firm. I'm just saying that maybe it's not completely black and white. He did a really messed up thing. But it sounds like he was trying to protect himself too. People with that much money, they probably do deal with a lot of people who only want them for what they have. That doesn't give him the right to lie. No, it doesn't. You're right to be angry. I just think maybe when you're ready, you should hear him out. Really hear him out. Jessica didn't respond. She wasn't ready to think about hearing David out. She wasn't ready to think about David at all. The weekend crawled by. Jessica tried to distract herself with Netflix and cleaning her apartment and anything else that would keep her mind occupied. But everything reminded her of him. The coffee mug he'd used when he came over. The book he'd recommended that was sitting on her nightstand. The jacket she'd borrowed one night when it got cold, which still hung on the back of her door because she'd forgotten to return it. Sunday evening, she finally listened to one of his voicemails. She told herself she was just deleting them, but her finger hovered over the play button until she gave in. Jessica. His voice filled her quiet apartment and she squeezed her eyes shut. I know you don't want to talk to me. I understand why. But please, I need you to know that everything between us was real. My feelings are real. Yes, I lied about my job and my money, but I never lied about caring about you, about falling for you. You're the first person in years who saw me as just me, and I was terrified of losing that. I know that's not an excuse. I know I should have told you sooner. I hope someday you can forgive me. There was a long pause and she thought the message was over. Then his voice came back quieter. I miss you. I miss talking to you. I miss the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I miss everything. And I know I don't have the right to miss you because I'm the one who ruined this, but I do anyway. The message ended. Jessica sat there staring at her phone, feeling her careful walls starting to crack. Monday morning arrived too fast. Jessica dragged herself to work, putting on her professional face even though she felt like she was barely holding it together. Her team was still buzzing about the Park Industries contract. Everyone congratulated her, patted her on the back, talked about how this was going to change everything for the company. Her boss called her into his office mid-morning. Jessica, I wanted to talk to you about the Park Industries project, he said, gesturing for her to sit. Her stomach dropped. Had David said something? Was he pulling the contract because of their personal drama? Mr. Park specifically requested that you be the lead account manager, her boss continued, smiling. He was very impressed with your presentation, said you showed exceptional understanding of the brand vision. Jessica felt sick. I'm honored, but maybe someone else would be better suited. Nonsense. This is your project. You earned it. Her boss leaned forward. Between you and me, this could lead to a promotion. Park Industries is our biggest client now, and they want to work with you specifically. That kind of client relationship is invaluable. So this was David's play. Give her the professional opportunity of a lifetime, making it impossible for her to refuse without raising questions. Force them to interact, manipulate the situation just like he'd manipulated everything else. Or maybe, a small voice in her head whispered, he's trying to make sure your career benefits from this even if your relationship doesn't. She hated that voice. I'll do my best, Jessica said, standing up. Thank you for the confidence in me. That afternoon, she received an email from David's assistant requesting a meeting to discuss project details. Wednesday at 2 p.m. at Park Industries headquarters. Jessica stared at the email for a long time before responding with a professional confirmation. The next 2 days were torture. Jessica went through the motions at work, but her mind was constantly spinning. What would she say to him? How would she act? Should she be cold and professional? Or should she tell him everything she was feeling? Wednesday arrived. Jessica chose her outfit carefully, a different suit this time, telling herself it had nothing to do with wanting to look good and everything to do with professional presentation. She was lying to herself and she knew it. The assistant met her in the lobby and escorted her to a different conference room on the 20th floor, smaller than the first one, more intimate. Jessica's nerves were screaming by the time she walked in. David was already there, standing by the window. He turned when she entered, and the look on his face made her breath catch. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. Thank you for coming, he said formally. It's my job, Jessica replied, keeping her voice neutral. She sat down at the conference table and pulled out her laptop. Should we wait for the others? There are no others. I wanted to talk to you alone. If this is about us, it's about the project, David interrupted gently. I promise. I know you don't want to discuss anything personal, and I'll respect that. But we do need to work together on this campaign, and I want to make sure you're comfortable with that. Jessica studied him, looking for the manipulation, the angle, but he just seemed tired and sad and genuine. I'm professional enough to separate business from personal matters, she said. I know you are. I've never doubted your professionalism. David sat down, leaving 2 chairs between them. I also want you to know that I've assigned my VP of marketing to be your primary contact. You'll work directly with him for most of the project. I'll only be involved in major decision points. Trying to avoid me? Trying to make this easier for you? His eyes met hers. I know being around me hurts right now. I don't want to cause you more pain than I already have. The sincerity in his voice was almost harder to take than anger would have been. Jessica looked away, focusing on her laptop screen. That's considerate, thank you. They spent the next hour discussing the project in detail. Despite everything, Jessica found herself impressed by David's vision for the sustainable housing initiative. He wasn't just talking about building apartments and making money. He wanted to create communities, to provide affordable housing that didn't sacrifice quality, to prove that profit and social responsibility could coexist. This was the David she'd thought she knew, the one who cared about helping people. The elderly woman on the fourth floor, Jessica said suddenly, interrupting his explanation of the solar panel specifications, the one whose heating broke. That was real, wasn't it? That wasn't a made-up story. David looked surprised. Yes, that was real. That building, the one where I told you I worked, I own it. But I do volunteer there sometimes, doing actual maintenance. It keeps me grounded. Reminds me what this business is actually about. So you do take the bus sometimes? I do. And I do own that worn jacket you always teased me about. I bought it in college and I've kept it because it reminds me of who I was before all this. He gestured vaguely at the office around them. Not everything was a lie, Jessica. The person you got to know, that was me. Just not all of me. But the important parts you hid? Yes. He didn't try to deny it. I hid the parts I was afraid would change how you saw me. And instead you made sure I'd never be able to trust how I see you again. The words hung in the air between them. David flinched like she'd hit him, but he nodded. I know. I understand that. And I'm not asking for forgiveness or another chance. I just want you to know that what we had, what I felt, that was real. Whatever else was fake, that wasn't. Jessica closed her laptop and stood up. I should go. If we're done with the business discussion, we are. David stood too. Thank you for hearing me out. She walked to the door, then stopped with her hand on the handle. Without turning around, she said quietly, I'm not ready to forgive you. I don't know if I ever will be. I understand. But for what it's worth, I believe that your feelings were real. I think you did care about me. I just don't think you cared enough to be honest with me. And that's something I can't get past. She left before he could respond, making it to the elevator before the tears started. Over the next week, Jessica threw herself into work. She met with David's VP of marketing, a friendly older man named Thomas who seemed to understand that there was tension between her and the CEO even if he didn't know the details. They communicated mostly through email with occasional phone calls. Jessica tried not to think about David. She really did. But he was everywhere. In the business articles she researched for the campaign, in the company memos that came across her desk, in the comments Thomas made about what Mr. Park wants or Mr. Park's vision. Her friends tried to distract her. Rachel set her up on a date with a friend of a friend, a nice accountant named Mike who was perfectly pleasant and completely forgettable. Jessica spent the whole dinner comparing him to David and hating herself for it. 2 weeks after their meeting at Park Industries, Jessica was working late when her phone rang. Unknown number.